Hello, welcome to Abbey Road Studios in London for a very special Facebook Live webcast marking the anniversary release of Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band by the Beatles. My name is Matt Everitt and I'm here with Giles Martin.
Hello.
And we're going to be talking a little bit about the creation of the reissue, talking about the massive amount of work that went into the project and taking some questions that have been pitched to us in advance. First of all, welcome. Thank you very much for doing this.
It's great to be here.
Actually, since the sort of project first got announced, have you felt this enormous sort of wave of affection? Because it has. Everybody's been talking about this.
Yeah, I mean, when we're doing something like this, the thought process is, you know, this is nerve-wracking. And then the first time you play it to people, the first people I play it to are Paul and Ringo, and their acceptance means that kind of we're going in the right direction. And since people have been hearing it, and now today it comes out, it's kind of a huge relief. It's like, oh, it's out there, and I don't have to talk about it for much more.
I mean, how does the process start? Is there like an apple-coloured Beatle phone in your house that sort of goes off and you get the call going? We're doing it.
There is a green phone, and it goes hello, hello, like that, and rings. And I answer. No, it's. We talk about what we're going to do. We talk about the best way to do things. And it's sort of momentum, you know. I was asked to remix the number ones year before last, and I was concerned. I sort of said, I think it's a bad idea. And that's
really?
why, yeah, because it's that thing you just go. You know, the records sound pretty good, you know. And then they said they want the Apple said we need to do them 5/1, and to do 5/1 mixes you have to remix from the original multitracks. So we remixed the number ones, and in the process we made stereos, and then they came out and people liked them, and that sort of gained confidence. Okay, we could mix Sgt Pepper, and then the thought is, you start doing it, and you go. The sort of eider down I can sleep under is the fact that if it's really bad, then no one gets to hear it.
Right.
So that's the sort of cozy I have. That you just go, this isn't working, guys, and so we don't do it.
Where do you start with a project of this scale? Do you start with thinking we're going to do the stereos, or we're going to go back to the monos, or we're going to do the 5.1, or we're going to start with the unreleased material? Because there's loads of stuff on this box set. What was the first thing you tackled?
The first thing is think about the stereo, because that's what most people are going to hear.
Right.
And you have to approach something like this with the sort of, you bridge the gap between it's really the fans. It's what the fans want, and you have to make sure that you're serving people watching this. That's what we're trying to do here. And so it's the stereo, and you think about, the first thing you do is actually, I know all of where everything is on the multitracks, because I've worked on them before, and then you sort of mix it in your head, and then Sam O'Kell, who's genius mix engineer I work with, I'll sit with him and go, hey Sam, I think for this one we should push these things a bit more and try a bit more expansive, and I thought we're a bit safe with the number ones, and this is Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, the most coveted album of all time. Let's try and push the technology.
Yeah. In terms of the sort of multi-track tapes, we're at Abbey Road right now, which is great. Are they in this building? The Great Vault?
I couldn't possibly say.
Seriously, is it actually a secret?
No, they're in this building.
Right.
They are, and they are in amazing condition. I was surprised. I first came in here with my dad. He asked me to work on an anthology, and I was sort of my father's ears growing up, and and I remember they put on the 4-track of A Day in Life. And we were upstairs in the penthouse, which is the top, and it was like they were in the room. You know, it was like the Beatles in the room. I expected this reel-to-reel tape to sound a little bit hissy or something. It just sounds like a recording done today. You know, recording hasn't moved forward that much, or if at all, someone would argue, in the last 50 years. I mean, my dad started here in 1950. And his goal was to try and make a voice sound like a voice on a record. You know, as simple as that. And they got there pretty quickly. You know, they got to that recording level of fidelity pretty quickly. In people's houses, it still sounded terrible. In the studios, the actual on tape sounded great.
So in terms of the first track that you tackled, I mean, did you think I'll tackle them chronologically in terms of the order the Beatles recorded them, or I'll do them with a track listing, and also, that first tape on the machine?
I try. No, we didn't tackle them chronologically. The first track they recorded for Sgt Pepper, the album, was When I'm 64, and we didn't start with that. I'm trying to think what we started with. I think we started with Lovely Rita. I think we just chose one You know, we didn't mix the album. Or did we start mixing the album in order? I know we started chopping and changing around because, you know, it has to suit your mood. I mean, the whole thing, it sounds really simplistic, but the whole thing about this is it's meant to be fun.
Yeah.
I know it's our job, but we try, you know, seriously. Because if you
It's terribly difficult
yeah,
talking.
it's a very,
I
I envy other people. No, it is. It's, you think, and if we're not in the mood, we choose something else. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I guess we have that privilege, because you have to approach everything with you can't remix an album like Sgt. Pepper thinking that you're going to be scared of it,
right?
Because then you can't. It's like driving a car and being worried about you're going to crash all the time. You're a nervous drive and you can't do anything. It's the same with mixing a record. You have to go, let's do this. This is going to be great, and throw us. And so we change the song depending on the mood.
There's some happy mixes,
yeah,
sad mixes.
very, very sad.
I mean, I'm guessing you do have to like totally immerse yourself in the whole record, though. You've got to try and put your mindset, especially with the monos, in there, like the band and your dad.
Well, you know, the band mixed the monos, and with my father and with Jeff Emmerich, and they really concentrated on this mono mix because that's what they had at home, and that's what people in the UK had a lot of mono stuff, and stereo was an afterthought. And the monos are much more elaborate in their mixing. There's a lot more effects on the monos. There's more vari speed, and no one ever listens to them. The stereos are kind of reasonably dry as far as they're not that effective. They're done very quickly, and so we listen to the monos. And the way we do it is, for any of you people at home who want to mix Beatles stuff, you know, this is the way to do it. We'd have the mono and the stereo and our multi-track. So the multi-track is the original tapes, and we'd sync them all up. And so we'd switch on the desk and listen to them all and think, where are we in the mix stage?
So you're referencing all the time. Obviously, people are very excited about the mixes. They're also very excited about the previously unreleased audio that's on there as well. Is there? I mean, how much tape wasn't used? How much stuff did you have to go through to find what's on the box set?
Well, this album's thought about as a studio album.
Yeah.
You know, but in the grand scheme of things, compared to what happened after the Beatles, a studio album, you know, some people take 3 months doing a song. This album took 3 months to make. And they would record very quickly, and they would record live. So something like Sgt. The first opening track is done in 9 takes. So on the extras, I put in take 1 and take 9. So the final take before they started overdubbing on top, which is the base of the band playing live. And that's it. And that's quite a lot of takes for Sgt. Pepper's. I mean, Fixing a Hole was done in 3 takes, for instance.
Is that all?
Yeah, the string sessions for She's Leaving Home was 6 takes of the string backing. And they used take 1. Fixing a Hole, they used take 1 as well.
Because you think, because of the nature of the reputation of the album, it was meticulously done. But you imagine that it was.
But I think compared to before,
right?
You know, compared to before, because it's the first album that they didn't have a touring schedule behind it. So there'd be, you know, Brian Epstein would say to my father, who said the Beatles, okay, we have until Thursday. It's Tuesday. We've got to do 6 songs. That would be it.
It's insane when you think about
that. And Paul says, you know. That, you know, we'd phone up. Brian would tell us that, you know, we got 2 weeks off, and then we go, yes, you go, but we have to record an album. You know, that was it. And so that Sgt. Pepper was the first time this hadn't happened.
Because this was obviously a huge leap forward in production techniques. What do you think was the biggest innovation that took place during the sessions for Sgt. Pepper?
Well, I think they'd been playing around with all these things before. If you think about, string quartet. Eleanor Rigby, Yesterday. Think about, you know, tape loops and tape speed, Tomorrow Never Knows. You know, Rain as far as backward tapes, and all of these things that kind of been played around with ADTing, which is artificial double tracking. And I think what happens with Sgt. Pepper's is they suddenly had this palette. They had this beautiful studios they walked into, and it just said we can make a record we want to make. And also they were all. I'm not sure they were pulling or pushing in the same direction, but they were all in the same direction because they were basically pushing away their Screaming Girls fans that they wanted to indulge themselves in their own music that could be heard. And I suppose the innovation is the fact that they have so many colours to play with.
Yeah.
And you hear it on the record. You hear it from, you know, if you think from Within You Without You to When I'm 64 to Lovely Rita, which has Within You Without You obviously has dull rubas and sitars and tamboras. You know, When I'm 64 has woodwind, and then Lovely Rita has kazoos on it. You know, it's like, you know, it's not a guitar record, it's not a piano record, it's an orchestral record, but it has an orchestra on it. Most people who have symphony orchestras in their album don't just put them on one track for maybe a 45-second chunk.
And that's it.
If you think about it. And no one's done that since. You know, it was, and my father actually was worried that it was too indulgent.
Really?
Apparently, he played at someone at Capitol, played Day in the Life to someone at Capitol, going, "Is this a bit too pretentious?
Is it a bit much?
Was it a bit much?" You know, so and you can see why. I mean,
Yeah.
he was a man of, you know, he was the A&R producer. You know, it was the buck stopped with him. Wasn't some sort of, which is a great thing, by the way, and that's the privilege I have to. There's not some sort of committee that gets around these mixes and decides what's the right thing. It's not, you know, and he dealt with that, so he had to think about whether it was the right thing for them, and of course it was.
Were there any moments when you were doing the mixes and you thought, where does that sound come from? How did they do that?
There's times when you think, oh, that's amazing. You know, that, if it's well, I mean, things like the drum sounds. Some of the drum sounds.
I was going to talk about the drum sound. A lot of people,
you being a drummer,
a lot of people have talked about how amazing Ringo sounds.
Yeah, I mean the drum sounds on this record, and because the process. So you know, if you're recording on 4 tracks, which is a 4-track 1-inch tape machine, so you can record. Little Help from My Friends has an amazing drum sound on it. Has drums on one track, has keyboard, guitars, 2 guitars I think, or is it organ? The bass put on afterwards, and that was bounced down to another track, and so the drums are sort of slightly more compressed. That original drum sound, which you can now hear on these mixes, is just phenomenal. Lovely Rita. The snare drum on that is like to die for. And it's a really techie thing to say, but the drum sounds are the sort of drum sounds that if you got, I'm recording drums later on tonight, there's no way we're going to get even close to Sgt. Pepper.
Why is that?
It's a combination of, listen, Jeff Emerick was a phenomenal engineer, still is a phenomenal engineer, and also Ringo, you know, players have their sound. He was Ringo. Yeah, I mean, you know, I can pick up a Hofner bass if I have a Hofner bass. But I don't feel like Paul McCartney.
We have one here. No,
yeah. Here, I'll play the parts from Sgt. Pepper. But you don't, you know, it's all about, you know, it's the same. My father made 2 albums with Jeff Beck, and Jeff Beck is one of those players that he picks up a guitar and it's just in his fingers, and you're looking at it, it's a Stratocaster from Marshall amp, and oh right, it's Jeff Beck, and people forget that. And the great thing about the extras on this record, I think, is the fact that you hear the band playing and you hear it's them. People look for this sort of magic unicorn that came down from the sky to deliver these sounds.
We have a magic unicorn right here. Yeah,
you know, there's sort of hey, these sounds came. You know, it was the genius of George Martin, or the beauty of it was you know, it was a collaborative effort. It's a group of musicians. But the sounds come from a band. They were a band, and they made really good sounds. And the beauty of a brilliant band, whether it be the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, or whoever, together they make a much better sound than when they're separate. And that's that beautiful human gel you don't get from programming.
If you're, say, like a little bit of a Beatles obsessive, I am quite a lot of a Beatles obsessive, and there's outtakes here and there's stuff that you haven't heard before, what are the things that you think you're going to be particularly excited to hear of the stuff that hasn't been?
Well, choosing the extras is actually much tougher than mixing the album, because mixing the album, I sort of had this template. You feel like you're there with the spirits in the room, and you have the mono. But the extras are sort of, you always have the thing about, are we scraping them on the barrel here? You know, are we providing people with what they need? And you do it in a process where you think, oh wow, as a fan or as a music fan, you go, that's pretty cool. That's pretty. And so there are anomalies. Like there's a Day in the Life they recorded. Their first idea, there's a big string crescendo at the end of Day in Life, everyone knows, and there was no resolve to that. And they thought, well, they should do this big choral hum, this and they recorded this. They actually recorded it on 4 tracks, and it sounds pretty terrible. It's reassuring that the Beatles' genius and their ideas, they could have a bad idea amongst great ideas. It's like, you know, they're human after all. And then things like the piano, I found the actual take of them making the piano chord following that, and then discussing it and getting the chord right. You know, and it's the mechanics of it, and just hearing different takes, hearing them talk, hearing, you know, Paul talk to John, John talk to Paul, and the collaboration of how you're going to sing lines for Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, or how you're going to approach Getting Better, and you know, because they're singing live and playing at the same time. You know, Fixing a Hole is Paul playing harpsichord and singing. You know, so that it's their all. I think this album and the outtakes show this is the peak of their collaborative powers, using my dad as sort of a funnel for their ideas to spool down onto a disc, and hearing that energy in the room, which you do on the outtakes because they're raw, is the thing that knocks me out more than anything else.
Which it takes. People have been submitting questions for this.
We've had complaints.
And yes, please get off now. Craig Mitchell. I heard George Martin. Hi, Craig. I heard George Martin thought his biggest mistake was not putting Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane on the Pepper album. Do you know where in the song sequence he thought they should go? This has been talked about a fair bit.
This is slightly misinterpreted because he said it was his biggest mistake. His biggest mistake, he said, I'm going to get this wrong. Well, he was my dad, but he always said that the bigger mistake was making Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane a double A side, because that meant it was split into two and didn't make number one, and it was the first Beatles record not to make number one
because it wasn't a very good single.
Because had it been just Strawberry Fields the thing or Penny Lane, it would have been number one. So it was a double A side, so it didn't. And that he always said that was his biggest mistake. Him not being on the album, it's funny to say that because it was never going to be on the album because it was a single. His rule in those days was, right, which actually is amazing to think about it now. His rule was if it's been, why make people pay for something twice? Here we are talking about the 50th anniversary release of Sgt. Pepper. Why do a single and then you have to buy it again on the album? Where if you think about albums now, they're kind of a bunch of singles and the other records that were trying to be singles.
Exactly.
So yeah, he never discussed where it was going to go. We thought about it for this release. Actually, we thought about where we're going to. Yeah, I talked to Paul about it, and then you realise, wait a second, the album. You can't put at the beginning of the album because the album begins with the audience settling in and you're in for a trip, and then you can't put the end because the end and you can't put the piano chord. So you have to then ruin the running order of the album. The only way you could really put it is between side one and side two, but people don't have that anymore anyway.
And what did Paul say? Was Paul like, leave it as it is?
Yeah, well, no, Paul. The conversation, honestly, one of those goes, well, maybe we could leave a gap of say 25 seconds and then have them at the end of the album, and then we looked at each other and we're like, what are we doing?
It's not the album.
You know, why are we having this conversation? I wanted to make sure in the streaming world that we live in a global jukebox that they were released on streaming, because that bothered me when we did the ones. Some of the extra mixes we did for the DVD, which was stereo, never made the streaming services, which I thought was, the kids, I'll listen to them. I've met the kids, they're nice.
Greg Viner. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Greg.
Tape condition is always an issue, Giles. What kind of shape are the master tapes in?
It may be an issue for you, Greg, but not for me. No, it's not an issue, fun enough. And it's a good question because it's one of those sort of weird things that the Beatles recorded on this thing called ME tape. And a lot of bands didn't record an ME tape, and it's amazing that we've never had to. There's a thing called tape baking, which Greg may know about, which is where you actually put a tape in an oven for about 8 hours, and it re-glues the magnetic oxide back onto the tape so it doesn't shed, and then you can only play it once. Now, we've never had to bake a Beatles tape.
Really?
My band I was in the 90s, which was pretty terrible, I got our monster trucks out and none of the tapes worked, which is probably for the sake of humanity. Actually, we weren't that bad. But for the sake of humanity, maybe, the tapes shredded. And none of the Beatles tapes, they're all in an incredible condition. They really are. And the most amazing thing is, I guess because they were pretty successful early on, in fact, from record 2, in fact, the record, the one master track we don't have is Love Me Do. One of the versions of Love Me Do we don't, and She Loves You. So the two, we don't have the stereos of those.
But everything else?
Everything else. We have everything else. All the takes, everything. And they're all in amazing condition. And that's why, if they weren't in amazing condition, we wouldn't be able to do this project. We don't clean anything. I mean, apart from ourselves.
Apart from ourselves from time to time. Jeff Bazel says, I believe Sgt. Pepper was the last album to be recorded using valve technology. Is this true? Do you think this influenced the sound?
I don't think it was the last album.
What's valve technology, Giles?
Well, there's valve amplification, there's transistor amplification, and they're different forms. And if you get into the thing, I know what they have in them.
Right.
But no, because we're still using valve microphones throughout, and the desks. Yeah, no, it wasn't actually. I don't think. I think it was varied, but no, I'm still using compressors that are valve.
Yeah. Well, here in this very building, there's a microphone room, and they've still got microphones, and they still
all of the microphones. Yeah, I mean, the Beatles microphones here are used more than. I mean, they're not the Beatles microphones because they were here before the Beatles. But yeah, the advantage of doing a mixed project like this in Abbey Road is we can use all of the stuff they use, and often we do, and then we can use the modern stuff we have as well.
Well, this is a question from John Brannigan, who says, "Hello, Giles.
Hello, John.
You legend."
Thanks, John. He's my mate from. He's
smiley face.
He's my mate from college. Hey, John. Nice to see you again.
My question is, when you were remixing the album, did you use any original studio equipment, compressors, limiters, hardware, EQ?
We used. They used Altec compressors. We used the same Altec compressors. We used the same desk if necessary, the red desk, or they used a TG desk later, which we use more often. Abbey Road, sort of that period, same sort of desk that then the next version Pink Floyd recorded Dark Side of the Moon on. So it's a good sounding desk.
It's done some records.
Yeah, it's done some records. We made it sound terrible, but it was a good sounding desk. And then Fairchild amplifiers, Pultecs, all of the, and the original Abbey Road plates, which are reverb units, we still use. So, yeah, we use a combination is the answer. It's great. I mean, nowhere else in the world could we be able to do this, because you can wear the same clothes and it's almost like, I feel like sometimes we feel like we put on tweeds and go reenact the mix of Sgt. Pepper. Yeah.
What was the hardest thing about this? Was it because I think you mentioned this before? You can kind of over polish. You can sort of spend too much time getting everything perfect, and you can maybe lose some of the spirit of the sound, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you can lose the song. There are certain songs that this applies to more than others. I remember Fixing a Hole we did, and Fixing a Hole sort of sounded, Sam and I talked to each other, and we're like, it doesn't sound, it sounds good, but it doesn't sound like Fixing a Hole. It sounds, and Fixing a Hole kind of needs that sort of, that sort of slightly that was 1 kilohertz sort of area, that it needs that, because that's the sound of the song. And I learned this pretty early on with mixing Beatles stuff, that it's not about hi-fi, it's about feel. We have the advantage of being able to go back to the early generations of tapes, so immediately it sounds good. You get credit. I remember once Olivia Harrison walked into studios, and I had all the faders up like this on the desk, and she goes, "The mix sounds great." And I was like, "Oh, thank you very much." And it's just because she's listened to a first generation tape. So I remember things like A Day in the Life was a challenge for us, because the drums on the mono, if anyone listens to the mono A Day in the Life, the drums explode. Because they're coming out of one single source. If you imagine stereo, you can have separate things in different instruments. But the drums kind of take over the mix and go back in again through limiters. And to get that in the stereo version is very hard, and we really tried to go for that. So that was an example of a challenge. But the whole thing was quite challenging, because as I say, you're dealing with a record that sounds pretty good to begin with, and you don't want to. It's not about high fidelity. It's about. For me, I want people to have the same privilege that I have. I'm the son of George Martin. There's no doubt that I wouldn't be doing this job probably if I wasn't the son of George Martin. So I feel privileged. I feel privileged by doing this job anyway on top of that. And I feel like other people should hear what I hear. It's as simple as that. So how do I get that into people's homes?
And before we break for a minute, what's next? What's next for you? What's next?
Well, I mean...
Or can't you say?
I can't really say, because we haven't decided, to be honest. I think that, and this is the day that Sgt. Pepper comes out on. And, I'm always humbled, I really am, by people's reaction to it. But it's them, it's not about me. I did a playback in New York, and there was a standing ovation. Certainly Sam O'Connell should be a standing ovation. There's a bunch of people, but more than I think it should be the Beatles and my dad and Jeff Emerick should be getting that, because we're just peeling back the layers and putting it back together. It's like you open up this thing, and it's in beautiful working order, and then you put it back together again, hopefully in the right way. So I think we'll just see how this goes, and if fans love it, then I'd be honoured to do more, is the answer.
That's a good answer.
Political answer.
Political answer, but a good one. Thank you very much for watching. We will be back. There's going to be a short break when hopefully we're going to try and actually play some music, some clips of some of the tracks that do appear on the record. So stay with us. Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Back in a bit.